In the perspective of yoga that we're discussing and learning, there's 4 paths of practice that build the foundation of what yoga is today and in our understanding through where it is through Hatha Vinyasa. Now, when we go back to those 4 paths and we trace back to the origins of the practice through this lineage and through this lens, there's 4 paths of yoga that I want to talk to you about that has led us to where we are today. Now, what we know as yoga today really only comes from one path of the practice, and I'm going to talk about that one last. But where I want to start is the 4 different paths called Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jñāna Yoga, and Rāja Yoga. Where we're going to start is Karma Yoga. Now, you've probably heard the term karma before. Karma is the type of thing where you get what you deserve, or whatever's meant to be will be. And karma, and when we talk about karma, often the context or the way it's talked about casually isn't talked about as accurately as it should be. Now, in Sanskrit, the word karma is understood as selfless action. So in many ways, this is yoga of action. This is the way in which we step out into the world with intention. The actions that we do, the behaviors that we keep, the way in which we show up selflessly and of service. Karma yoga is that which we're offering. Karma is that which we're supporting. And so karma yoga, the practice of selfless action, is a very dedicated practice in its own right. And it has nothing to do with the mat. It's how we support others out in the world. It's how we open a door without needing anyone to say thank you. It's how we're selflessly acting as a good human being in the world as we function in society. And so when people talk about karma, you get what you get, or what goes around comes around, it's not wrong, but it's not as accurate as it should be. It's better understood as selflessness in action is karma, and whatever you do is meant to be. Now, karma itself has levels to it, right? So you have this element of karma having levels of selflessness. And there's 3 different levels of karma I want to talk to you about. The first one being an aspect of karma, which is the highest form of it, called nishkama karma. Nishkama karma, which is the ultimate supreme selflessness. This is the offering without any need for return, the offering without any need for reward. Let's just keep it on a simple sense. If I open the door for you, it's without the need for you to say thank you, for you to look me in the eye and give me a smile. It's without any of that need, this selflessness that just says, I'm offering this piece of action or service unneeding of anything. Now, the reality as a human being, that's really hard, if not impossible. The way that we've raised, the values that we keep, the morals that we have, the courtesy of being a human being, by me opening the door for you, I don't want to need for you to say thank you. I don't want to need for you to smile. I don't even want to need to think that I need some sort of response or return, but it's human nature. Nishkam karma is this ultimate supreme sense of selfless service. Can you think of a place in your life or any place in society where there's absolute selflessness, absolute selfless service? Well, the one that comes up often is charity. Well, I'm going to go do charity as a selfless act. Well, what happens oftentimes, like it or not, when people go off and do charity, they go off and do something kind. They offer their time or their money or their resources. They also go around telling people about it. They put it on their tax return. They use it as part of their CV. And the return comes from other people knowing that they're doing charity. They post on social media, hey, I'm volunteering at a homeless shelter. All that in its own right is a return. It's a reward. It's a recognition. And while the act itself is selfless, it's not entirely selfless because there's a return coming back. You might say, Michael, well, it depends on the person. Well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't post it. I wouldn't tell people about it. The reality is there's still an element of return. It's the feeling good about doing something to help. It's about someone on the receiving end saying, thank you so much for your time, for smiling and having a giggle because you're playing a game or sharing a cup of tea. The reality is there's still return through charity. And you might argue otherwise. And perhaps maybe you might find a way in which there is an element of pure, ultimate selflessness. But also when you think about it, and you really sit with it, the ego will always find a way for a return. The ego will always find a reward in all of those selfless actions. Oftentimes, the yogis will say it is impossible to achieve or practice nishkama karma in our human condition, in our human form, because our ego needs and thrives off even the faintest bit of return. But don't worry, it doesn't mean that we're bad. It doesn't mean that we can't practice karma yoga. It just means that the idea of nishkam karma is more conceptual in most cases, in a practical way. But where karma actually becomes practice is in the second layer of it, is what we call sakam karma. Sakam karma is more about selfless action or selfless service with light return or appropriate return, right? Or gentle return. You could absolutely volunteer at a homeless shelter. And just by, getting some more smiles or having some nice conversations or sharing a meal, that is a gentle return. That's worthy of your selfless act, recognizing that you're still human. And so in most cases, we function or we practice karma yoga in this layer of sakam karma. And that is a beautiful thing. That's a positive thing. That's a generous thing. It's a dedicated thing. And do that. Don't stop doing that. And know that that's a beautiful way to practice karma yoga. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I have another example. And this is the other example that comes up a lot is, what about a mother's love? What about a parent's love to a child? That is absolute selflessness. Well, I would argue, is it? I've got 2 children, 2 boys, and the reality is I would do anything for them. I'd give anything for them. I'd give them everything and I'd be selfless. However, they're still the reflection of me. My ego still gets a reward when someone says, oh, your kids are so well behaved, or your kids are so creative, or your kids are so funny. My ego feels that. The I in who I am feels that reward, the reflection in a mirror and an extension of who I am. So I still get something back from that. Even though I would give them all the money in my bank account and I'd give them all the clothes off my back, me knowing that they're taken care of, that they're happy, that they're content, that they're well fed, that still is reward. Not in action, but in many ways in ego, in the mind settling. The quiet mind can often be a result of return of action. And so when we understand that even a parent's love is still selfless action with the faint return. And that's okay. And that's good. That's being human. And so karma yoga, when we practice this, is to proactively go out into the world and be selfless with our action. And knowing that there is a return that comes back, even if it's simply how we feel about our actions, or there's greater return that comes back and how there's equal exchange. That's okay. In the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see that there's different layers of karma yoga, layers of offering. And while in most cases, even the yogi will have minimal return, there is an element in which we understand that karma yoga, whether it's nishkam karma or sakam karma, is a very righteous action and a way to practice yoga. Now, I mentioned there's a third layer of karma. This is what we would call vikarma. And vikarma is often talked about not necessarily as a negative selfless action, but in many ways a motivated selfless action, or an action with special attention or intention. So V, if you remember from Vinyasa, V is special attention. So it's selfless action for special intention or purpose. An example of this, you've seen this storyline before. You're waiting in line at the grocery store, and you see on the counter that the 100th customer gets free groceries for the day. And you're standing in line, and you're 3 people back from your turn, and you can see that right now it's on 96. So you know that there's 97, 98, and you're 99. So that means the person behind you is 100. They're the 100th customer. And so what do? You turn around to the person and say, oh, You just have a few things. Why don't you go in front of me? You go in front of me. I feel like if you get your stuff out of the way, I've got a big basket, you go for it. And so this selfless act, letting someone go in front of you, vikarma, is motivated because you know there's a big return coming for you. You let them go, and then you get to the front, you play dumb and go, oh my goodness, I'm 100, free groceries. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Well, you did, and it was motivated through that action. And you might say that's quite negative and that's quite pessimistic and not a great way to act and behave, but the truth is it's motivation based. Now that's an extreme example of it. Another aspect could be something a little bit lighter, where essentially you're in a parking lot waiting for a parking spot and you're waiting your turn, and you realize that actually if you let someone else go around you, they'll get the first spot and you can get the spot closest to the elevator. Harmless. No one gets hurt. However, it's motivated. The actions and the selflessness and the offerings that we do have an intentional motivation or premeditation. And so vikarma, while not talked about as much, is this idea that there's an element of premeditation or an element of motivation in our selfless actions that we put out into the world. And just so we're on the same page, I never want to qualify that as negative or bad behavior, but it's just understanding. It's a bit like saying, nudge, nudge, we both know what's going on, or you know the real reason you're doing this. However, oftentimes karma yoga in practice and in action is a practice that's valuable and beneficial, that's helping to support someone with some sense of selflessness in service. The second path of practice is Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga is a beautiful practice and a way that comes to life in the form of devotion, celebration, chant, mantra. If you've ever been around something like a kirtan or celebration where people are sitting and chanting and there's music playing, people are up and dancing, that's Bhakti Yoga, or that's an expression of Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is simply the practice of devotion, the practice of worship, of connection, of prayer. And these, in many ways, are the yogic monks, the spiritual practitioners, the ones that these are the ones you don't find on yoga mats, but the ones who are sitting in study, in prayer, in practice, in meditation, as their form of connection. They're the ones who are doing a japa practice, chanting, connecting themselves to the higher devotion of the practice. And this is a beautiful practice, and perhaps the part of the yoga practice that is most closely associated or understood towards a religious practice. Now, for context, yoga is not a religious practice. However, it is a spiritual practice, but for some people, that spiritual practice can almost allude and feel like a religious connection in the Western context. And Bhakti Yoga is that path that we find our way into that point of connection. And so whether or not in this moment right now, Bhakti Yoga for you is devotion or celebration, they all lead towards the same idea of connecting to a higher spiritual consciousness that exists and we can feel a connection towards. The third path of the practice is a practice called Jnāna Yoga. Now, Jnāna Yoga is the practice of wisdom, or what I like to talk about as wisdom acquisition, the practice of study and learning, the practice of deepening our understanding of the essence of what yoga is. Now, in many ways, Jnana yogis are the scholars, the ones who read all the books, who study all the text, who understand the nuance that comes to life through the practice. There's two different ways the wisdom is categorized, Shruti and Smriti. Shruti is the revealed text. In many ways, it's often talked about the ones that were revealed, authorless texts from the early centuries of practice, the Upanishads, the Vedas, where these were discovered as ways that we understood the practice to be absorbed into the consciousness of humanity. On the other side, you have Smriti, the texts that are remembered or written down. These are the authored practice by humans, whether it's the Yoga Sutras, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the Bhagavad Gita. These are the ones that actually are written and formed as a way to share perspective in a more applicable way into modern life or real world living. Now, I'm not saying it's in recent real world living, it's of the time that they were created, but what's a beautiful way of understanding Jnana Yoga, it's the learning, the reading, the studying, and the conversing about how this practice comes to life as a way of life. And that's what's beautiful about Jnana Yoga. The fourth path of the practice is Raja Yoga. Now, Raja Yoga is the path of meditation, the path of contemplation. And this is the inner understanding of how the physical practice manifests itself in action. Now, as we know, yoga, the physical side of yoga, was first understood simply as a meditative seat, a physical awareness to help move us towards stillness. And Raja Yoga literally translates to royal. And in many ways, in the early years and centuries of practice, these types of practices were the practices of the renunciates, the ones who were out in the wilderness, practicing yoga in a way that they could connect to a deep awareness and a consciousness. And like all things that are interesting, mystical, magical, they were acquired by the royals. The high society said, this is now ours. Teach us these wisdoms. Hence Raja Yoga. And so through meditation and through these practices, the physical practice was born. Now you might say, how does Raja Yoga get us to where we are in Vinyasa practice? Well, in truth, in those early days, Raja Yoga, those meditative practices, when we look back at the early iterations of what practice was, for example, in the Yoga Sutras, it was very much mentioning one practice of the physical body, where effort and stillness, or effort and ease, create the seat for practice, sthira sukhamasana. And later on in texts, we learn and we understand in things like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it was only ever mentioned 15 physical postures. 4 of those postures that we know form the seat of practice. Siddhasana, Padmasana, Bhadrasana, Simhasana. These are all seated postures for practice. And later on, through the generations of practice that have brought us into more of a modern era, the physical practice, as we know, became the version or the iteration that we see today. And so Raja Yoga, if you start to draw the dotted line down, is where we find the practice of Hatha Yoga, the practice of force, of action, of effort. And through Hatha Yoga, in the East, as it moved west, it started to iterate. It started to create its different branches and arms of the practice. And through the Western vehicle of promotion, or the Western vehicle of expansion, Hatha Yoga became Ashtanga Yoga, Iyengar Yoga, Vinyasa Krama, Vini Yoga, all of these Western styles of practice that have now created all the different types of practice that we practice today. But in many ways, they all come from the same branch of the tree, the same path of the practice. So the fact that we can talk about power yoga, vinyasa yoga, flow yoga, jivamukti yoga, it's all from that same path of practice, all through the lens of Hatha Yoga, which comes from Raja Yoga, the royal practice, the seat of the practice. And when we start to clear the air and move away the dust, we realize that it's all of the same. Through one path of practice of these 4 paths of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga. And these are the 4 paths of practice, as shared and understood as a way to identify and realize that yoga is more than simply the movement of the body or the actions of our practice, but the selflessness, the devotion, the wisdom, and the royal path or seat of practice that has moved us into what yoga is today.